Now, I've been asked to tell the story by various people about the episode of A2884 on the Woodend Centenarian. Two locomotives were engaged on this train, A2884 and A2995. The driver of 995 was Jim Soletto with a fellow by the name of Bob Holdsmith, I think it was, who was firing for Jimmy. I had a fellow by the name of Bob Lampart who fired for me on A2884. Bob confessed to me that he really wasn't up with firing A2s, and I said, look, Bob, don't worry, we'll get there. If you can't, well, then I should be able to. So we prepared both the engines, Jimmy with the oil burner, me with the old coal burner, and she had the reputation for being an old slug as regards making steam. She was an outlaw A2. It's interesting to reflect, although they were all built off the same drawing board, all steam locomotives were different. This was an outlaw A2, and it was the A2 that dented my reputation. Not that I really lost any sleep over that. We coupled onto the train at Spencer Street, and it was a showery afternoon, and the train, I believe, and thinking back about it, consisted of 13 or 14 E-cars and a CE van. We set sail eventually out of Spencer Street with the big train following, and it was a beautiful looking train. The Walshart A2 was in front and we were behind as the banker, and we set sail on our epic trip to Woodend. I believe the date was October 1961. By the time we were getting up towards St Alban, Bob was in real difficulty maintaining water and steam in our loco. He said, Gerald, we're not going too well. I said, look, Bob, come over here and take my chair, and I'll take yours and see if we can encourage the old girl to make some steam. However, as we kept on going, I was just holding my own with about 3 studs of water in the bottom of the glass, and we'd managed to get our full head of steam. We stopped at Sydenham for a photo stop, and Arthur Reynolds, who was the travelling foreman on the front engine, decided to come back to us and see what was ailing us. The photo stop was conducted, and people even climbed up the starting signal for the photo stop, and one of these legendary characters was the late Eric Quinlan, who always used to wear, I believe, a red or bright coloured jumper, and he would climb on anything to get his photo that was always, hopefully, he thought, different to everyone else's. Anyway, back to 884. Arthur Reynolds climbed aboard and said, you're having a rough one, Gerald. I said, yes, Arthur, she's not going too well. He looked at Bob Lampart sitting in my chair and me sitting on his chair and tipping a fire into 884 now and again with the injector on to get some steam back. And he said, let me have a go at it. I think I might be able to tickle her fancy and make a go. So all right, we set sail out of Sydenham with Arthur firing, me back driving and Bob sitting on his chair. Arthur, I'm afraid, didn't do any good at all. The further we went, the worse old 884 was going, and Jim Soletto on 995 was really thumping the dear old Walshart 10-wheeler. All we could do was just hold our own and do our bit with moving the train and keep on with 884 as best we could. We stopped at Sunbury, and Jim took some water on 995, then we moved forward slightly and put our tender under the bowser and took water on 884. And I said to Arthur Reynolds, I said, look, Arthur, I think you better be the driver. We'll make Bob the travelling foreman and I will be the fireman. Do we agree? Arthur agreed to this under the circumstances because we were not going too well, and I planted a good starting fire into 884. Jim in front sounded out 995's whistle, tipped from the guard, and off we go. Arthur's sitting in my chair, and when we went under the Bluestone Arch Bridge just on the down end of Sunbury, he put our engine over into the second valve, the big valve allowing full steam pressure down to the cylinders. I said, I'm sorry, Arthur, but I don't agree. He said, what do you mean, Gerald? I said, if you keep on like this, we won't even get halfway to Clarkfield and we'll be out of pup. I said, now look, put her back in the first barrel, wind her out, and we will run in the first valve all the way as far as we can. Meanwhile, Jim on 995 with a thunderous exhaust and beautiful smoke cloud, and we're puffing and puffing along in our first barrel, but a good wind out of the wheel. I believe we're doing our part in moving the train. Arthur Reynolds was a little bit worried over this. He said, oh, we'll be losing time, Gerald. I said, well, look, the engine dictates the timetable. I know that people in head office write the timetables out, but let the old girl work herself out. So every time I threw a fire into 884, I shut the injector off till I put the fire on, and as soon as the fire was in and the door up in the last notch, put the injector back on. This way we held full steam pressure and maintained our water level about a stud from the top of the glass. But don't forget we were still in the first valve. We went up over the top of Sunbury cutting and worked our way around towards Clarkfield, and Arthur said, he's really giving us a good go for his money, Gerald, meaning old Jim in front on 995. I said, Arthur, he can't keep that up. There is no Walshart A2 in Victoria that can take what Jim's doing in order to help us and keep the train moving. We'll get to the stage where going up towards Riddle, where we'll have to do all the puffing and Jim will be back in his first valve. This is how it happened, and we went up towards the Bluestone Arch at 39.5, with 884 really starting to thunder now, but with the water coming down in the glass but keeping full pressure, while Jim was not doing as well as he'd been doing previously, and thus the train moved on towards Gisborne. I will never forget this afternoon. It is by now starting to rain. It's a misty, cold, nasty rain as the two A2s with their 14 cars NCE van make their way towards Macedon. Climbing Macedon, believe it or not, the damned injector failed. Both injectors had failed, and all I can get is water out the overflow. Arthur said to me, I'll go up and dip the tank. I said, how on earth can you dip the tank with a wet cricker? You won't know where the water is. Forget about it. Anyway, up Macedon we struggled, with me still firing away, Jimmy doing the best he can, and I believe we topped over Macedon at the incredible speed of about 3 miles an hour with a passenger train. Ugh, how dreadful. Engine requirements done and fires cleaned and train rearranged. We then set sail to come back to Melbourne with me on 884 in the lead, with Arthur riding with me and Bobby Lampart doing his bit, and we set sail for Melbourne on a dark, gloomy evening with the two A2s and the big heavy 6-wheel bogie consist. Well, the trip home was quite uneventful. I remember there was a speed restriction for bridge repairs just near Macedon. What an awful place for a speed restriction with a train like this. But however, with using the brake very, very carefully, we negotiated the speed restriction at 10 mile an hour and proceeded back to Melbourne. When we finally arrived at Spencer Street, I was quite pleased to get home and think, well, what a trip. Never again will I ever enjoy a trip like that. I don't think an 884 will always live in my memory for that. On the Monday, of course, when I went into work, there waiting for me was Mr. Clearson, the superintendent of loco running, the chief foreman, and a couple of other travelling foremen waiting to talk to me about the trip on 884. I reported and told them everything that had gone on, and Mr. Clearson then produced a speed chart. He said, well, Gerald, he said, no doubt you've learned from the trip. He said, not much success on the down, but he said, you sure gave them a good ride home on the up. I was quite relieved at this because Mr. Clearson understood what had gone on, and as an ex-engineman of very high quality, he understood the duress that had gone on in the cab of 884.
As we have seen in our journey through Power Parade, locomotives have certainly changed from 1854 until today. As long as there are locomotives and trains, the railway will still be the railway.